Hi everybody, welcome to today's webinar. I'm just going to give everyone one more second to log in and then we'll go ahead and get started. If you do have trouble with audio at any point during the webinar, please go ahead and refresh your page and hopefully that will reset the audio for you guys. Okay, let's go ahead and get started, everybody. So welcome to today's webinar. The topic, of course, is Introduction to Templates in Tricentis Tosca. And I'm really excited to have everybody here and introduce you to what I think is one of the most useful features when you're starting out with automation of tests in Tosca. So a quick introduction of myself. My name is Sarah Romero. I've been with Tricentis for about 4 years now. I'm in the Tricentis Academy. So I'm a trainer and a lead instructional designer. So I work on the development of the training courses, the content that you see us putting out on YouTube, and as well as delivering trainings and webinar sessions such as this one today. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Please ask all of your questions in the question box. And the questions that are posed in the question box, we'll try to answer during the session as the session goes on. Any questions that I think kind of are relevant or interesting for the entire group, I'll make sure to answer in the Q&A only at the very end of the presentation. So I'm going to get through the entire session, and then at the very end, I'll have a Q&A where I'll maybe bring up some questions that might be relevant for a wider group, but go ahead and ask questions throughout the session in the question box, and we'll try to get those answered for you as we go. Just a note, in case you're wondering, all audience members are muted throughout the entire session, so you won't be able to unmute yourself or ask questions out loud. So please keep everything in the question box. And if you want to view some of the past recordings we've done, whether they're Tosca or if you want to look into some of our other products like Qtest or older user tutorials, please go to our website at tricentis.com/academy/microlearning-resources/user tutorials, and there you can find all of our past recordings as well as filter them, by tool or date and stuff like that. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the topic. I will primarily be working in Tosca, so I just want to introduce you to some of the concepts I'm going to be introducing, but the majority of this presentation is going to be hands-on in the tool, and I'm going to be showing you why templates are so useful in Tosca, how you can best utilize them, some best practices. So I'll walk you through the use cases for it. The idea behind using templates is a wider concept of reusability and centralized maintenance. So when you're looking at maximizing efficiency of your entire testing portfolio, one thing that you really want to do with whatever tool you're using, and this is what Tosca is great with, is reducing the amount of maintenance that's required for your test portfolio, as well as creating as many reusable artifacts as possible. Obviously, if you have objects that can be centrally maintained and reused throughout the project, then you can really condense the amount of time that's required for setting everything up, because you invest time upfront creating these reusable objects in your testing portfolio, and then you can go ahead and reuse them everywhere. So I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. Then I will go into really a brief introduction. So I hope that a lot of you do have some experience with automation in Tosca, but I will give a really brief introduction for those of you who aren't really familiar with it. But I would encourage you, obviously, after this webinar to go and take a look at our Automation Specialist Level 1 course if you haven't done any automation in Tosca, so that you are familiar with sort of the fundamental concepts that this is building on top of. But I'll briefly cover how test planning and automation work in Tosca. And then I will go into the core topic here, which is our template concept, how we turn the templates, the test cases that you've planned and automated into templates that can be reused for automating multiple scenarios. So you're going to see how to turn one test case into a template which can be used to automate as many scenarios as you need that follow a similar path through the application. And you'll also see how easy it then is to maintain the template artifacts. So if you have any changes, as I said before, you're using the centralized maintenance concept here so that any changes to the template then populate throughout to all of the test cases that are built on that template, so you don't have to worry about updating individual test cases. Okay, and then I'll open it up for a bit of a Q&A. Great, so let's go ahead and jump in. So I said I would briefly touch upon, again, this idea of reusability and centralized maintenance in Tosca. Here you have a brief overview about the way that you turn your application into a test case in Tosca. So we use what's called model-based test automation. And I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this, particularly if you've automated with Tosca before, but very briefly, in case you're not familiar, basically what you do with model-based test automation is you scan your application and you create a technical model, if you will, here an automation model of the application in Tosca, and you capture the technical information that you need to tell Tosca how to steer through the application. So you would select the relevant controls, because obviously there might be a lot of information in your application. In this case, you see an HTML screen. You would take the relevant controls here. So you can see, you might take a couple of these text boxes here, a drop-down box which has, a selection of options that you can choose from, and then so that goes for all of these controls, and then you have maybe at the bottom a button. Okay, so in this case you can see that we are following through the registration number text box where you enter the registration number for an automobile that you're registering for insurance, and you store a model of that page and all of those controls in Tosca. Okay, so here you have your registration number text box, and behind this, what we call module attribute in Tosca, you have the technical information that allows Tosca to scan the page and look for that control according to whatever technical criteria you've used to identify it, and then it will steer it, and you will then go to your test case section on the right-hand side of the page, and that's where you're going to enter the information to steer those controls. So Tosca uses the model, or we call it in Tosca a module. So it'll use the module that you've created to scan the page and find the controls according to your identification criteria, and then it will use the input, the business information that you've entered in the test case section to steer those controls and follow a path through the application, and that's your test. So what you do up front is you create this module. So this is the vehicle data module, which includes all of the controls you need on the page on the left-hand side here in your application. And anytime you want to steer any of those controls, anything on that page, you will use this one module and you will reuse it in any test case that uses these controls. So you will simply drag and drop it into any test case. So you'll literally just be dragging and dropping this module here over into the test case section in Tosca, and you can reuse this technical information anytime you need to steer these controls. And if you make any changes to the module, then automatically any instances in the test case section, anywhere that those controls or that page is used or steered in your test cases, they will automatically be updated. So let's say you have, 40 test cases that steer through this page and use these controls. Well, then immediately 40 test cases will get updated if you make one change over here. So you have centralized maintenance. So you only need to, let's say you add a control to the page, you only need to change it in the module here, and then the test cases get updated. And they're reusable in that you can drag and drop them into test cases as you need an unlimited number of times. Okay? So let's go ahead and look at this example sort of in real life. Okay, so let's go ahead and pull up this application that I was talking about. Okay, so here is an insurance application where you can calculate the insurance on your vehicle. You can select the type of vehicle that you want to insure, and then you can enter the data about the vehicle. Okay, so those are two steps. Selecting here the type of vehicle and then entering the vehicle information. If I look in Tosca, I've already, so here you can see I've got my sections I was talking about. So I've got my module section and my test case section. I'm really going to go through this quickly because I'm hoping that most of you do have a foundation in Tosca automation, but I just want to quickly summarize it so you know what this is building up on. Okay, so here you can see I have some modules I've created for this vehicle insurance application, and these are the modules that contain the controls on the page as well as the technical information for steering them. And I can simply go ahead and create a new test case in my test case section. I'll call it sample test just to show you. And all I do is drag and drop my modules into the test case section where they become test steps. Okay. So all I've done is drag and drop my modules over to the test case section where they become test steps, right? So you see that's where they're coming from. And the module attributes, the controls, become test step values where I can input information. So I can say, okay, I'm going to select the type of vehicle that I want to insure. I'll select the make. I'll add some number here. So I will add a date for when the vehicle was insured. Okay, I'm just going to put in some stuff here just for demonstration purposes. Okay, and that's it. And now I'm telling over here, Tosca knows how to find these controls, and these can be reused any number of times in any number of test cases. And over here, Tosca knows how to scan my application and what information to enter in order to steer them. Okay, so for each control now, for this test case, it knows that I'm going to test a BMW automobile with this data. And I could have another test case that tests even more information. Okay, then I just run my test in the scratchbook. So there's my progress bar. And you can see Tosca is entering all the data, and that's it. And that's how it automates, and there I have a successful test. So Tosca lets me know the test was successful. But now what happens? So this is great. I have one scenario, one test case, one path with one set of data through my application for testing a vehicle insurance. What happens if now I want to test different variations of this information? So what I'm going to do is I don't want to have to drag and drop my module and hard code these input values for every combination of vehicle and data type on that page, especially considering that with later tests, I might want to steer through this page, but I might not be testing anything on this page, right? So this might not be something I want to spend a lot of time on when I've already built these steps. So what we can do is we can go to the test case design section in Tosca. And in test case design, here you can really plan your various test scenarios. Here's where you can determine which tests need to be done to cover requirements, how many tests will need to be created to cover each requirement, what data will be required for each of those scenarios, and then it can all be maintained from one central location. So essentially, this looks a bit like an Excel sheet. So for those of you who are used to storing some of your data in Microsoft Excel, this may look similar to the way that you store some of your data for your test scenarios now. So essentially you have your first set of test data for your first scenario. This is like the happy path, or we call it a straight through, your most frequently used path through the application, maybe your smoke test for this particular insurance page for calculating vehicle insurance. And you can see that each column in a test sheet in the test case design section is a set of data and a pathway through your application. Okay, so the straight through of the happy path here is going to be selecting automobile, Audi, and you can see the set of data that we're testing for this particular scenario. And you can see now the variations for each test. So let's just look at the first three right now. The difference is in the make here. So for each test, you can see that we're going to be looking at a different make, and then the rest of the data below is going to be the same. Later on, the variation might be with the fuel type or with the list price. So again, you should be familiar with this. We're changing the focus and the data in the test cases so that we are testing the different controls on the page. So we might be testing the fuel type selector box or the list price text box and so on. Okay, so these test sheets are created upfront just like you would if you're doing scenario planning or test planning in any of your other projects. You would ideally want to do them up front before you start automating so that you know which tests are going to be needed to cover your requirements. Ideally, you will be looking at the most important requirements first and starting there with setting up your test sheets. And these then contain the hard data that you're going to need to guide Tosca through the different scenarios in the application. But what's the link now? Okay, so in the test case section, I have a test case, right, with hard-coded data. And in the test sheet section, or in the test case design section, let me move this over. Sorry. In the test case design section, I have my various scenarios for the same thing, right? So in the test case section, I've got my selection of the vehicle type and then the vehicle data that I want in my test. And in the test case design section or the test sheet, I have the same information, but for all of my various scenarios. Now again, like I said, you don't want to be creating a separate test case every time you have a different scenario in your test sheet, right? So somehow we want to turn this into a template that we can use to plug in values from the test case design section. And have Tosca automatically know which scenario we're running through, okay? And which data to pull from the test sheet. Similar to rows in Microsoft Excel. Just in this case, we're pulling from a column of data. Okay? So this is really simple. What you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and turn your test case into a template. So you go ahead and, let me zoom in here for you. You're going to go ahead and take your test case and do convert to template. And you can see that actually the icon here actually just changed to having a little T here. And that indicates now that my test case has become a template. Now, best practices is that I will immediately link my test sheet that my template is based off of to my template. Okay? So I immediately drag my test sheet on to my template. And this tells Tosca now, this test sheet with all of this data is going to be used with this template. So this template will be the basis upon which Tosca steers through the application, and the test sheet is going to be the data source for the sets of data each time that Tosca runs through the application. So for each scenario, each test, every time that a test case is run based on this template, a new column of data will be selected, or the appropriate combination of data will be selected. Right? So each column is a combination of data. And over here, I have my template with my steps. And now I'm going to want to replace these hard-coded data values with information from the test sheet to make it dynamic. Right? So here I have a type of vehicle with the values entered in this row. And basically, I can just drag and drop what's over here called an attribute. So here you have an attribute in your test sheet. So now I'm starting to use the specific test case design terminology. So on your test sheet, you have an attribute. And you drag the attribute into the value column in your test case. And you can see that an XL link is created, and this shows the path where that data value is going to now come from. So Tosca will now, for each instance or iteration of this template, every time Tosca, for each test case that's created based on this template, Tosca will go to the precondition attribute of my test sheet, and then the type of vehicle attribute, and then it will take the appropriate value or instance. So each different value here is called an instance. Okay? So when I first showed you the test sheet, I actually pressed F9, or in my case, Windows F9, to hide instances. And instances are, you can see the different variations of the attributes. The attributes are nothing more than just the, basically the representations of the controls or the places where you can enter data or where data variations will occur in your application. And then the instances are those variations of that data. So in this case, I only have, for this test sheet, the one variation of vehicle because I'm only testing automobiles here. And here, make would be a good example. For make, I have 3 different variations of the make, right? 3 instances. So make is the attribute on my test sheet that may link up to, depending on how you structure your test sheet, a module attribute. So in this case, the make text box, or the make drop-down box. So you can see here, this object links up with the make drop-down box, which of course you know from the application was a drop-down box on my vehicle data page. And I can replace the BMW value with this attribute, and the different instances in this row will be selected depending on which iteration of the template test cases, or which instance of the template test cases I'm running. And so I can go ahead and do this for all of the attributes quickly. Oops. So I'll do that for date, do that for the number of seats, I'll do that for the fuel type, the list price, the license plate number, oops, the annual mileage, and I'll go ahead and leave the click here. So the click is not something that I've stored as a data variation in my test sheet. Okay, there are obviously more pages in the application here, which I'm not going to show because it's a similar process. So there are more pages where I'm going to be entering information using modules and adding them to my test case here, to my template, but I'm just going to skip that so that for simplicity purposes, I'm showing you the two test steps that we created earlier, okay? So now your question might be, okay, that's great. I now have a template with some test steps and a bunch of these Excel links that now I'm going to have to every time, go back to my test sheet, and how am I going to know which column was being run? Okay, so now this is sort of the great feature of the template concept. Okay, so I've created my test case, turned it into a template, created my test sheet, linked it to the template. And now on my template, I can go to the Test Cases tab and go to Instantiate. Or you can right click and select Create Template Instance. Okay, so I'm going to go to Instantiate. It asks if I want to start the instantiation. Yes. And what is the instantiation doing? The instantiation is creating physical test cases, each one corresponding to a column, so a test case that I planned in my test sheet. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at that. First of all, let's see how many template instances I created. So first of all, let's see, so here I have selected my 16 objects. I can see down, I can see down at the bottom left here that I have 16 objects selected, okay? And if I hover over my test sheet, I can also see that I have 16 instances, which means 16 columns or 16 variations of the data on the test sheet, okay? So what I've done is I've created one physical test case, Tosca test case, in this template instance folder, and each one links directly to a column or an instance in my test sheet. Okay? And not only that, but now instead of those Excel links that you saw before, each one has now been replaced by the appropriate combination of data for that test case. Okay, so remember here in the first 3 test cases, we saw that it was the make that changed. So here you have Audi. And let's go ahead and check the second test case, BMW. You can see that BMW is selected, or would be selected when running the test case in the application, then Ford. And then we know that from the 4th test case on, we wanted the fuel type to change, and so on. Okay? So now you can see sort of the real magic behind the template concept here is that you you take the time to set up and plan the testing scenarios. You automate one time the test case, make sure to do all the proper linking, and instantiate, and then you basically have all of your test scenarios. And what's really the huge benefit of this? Not only is the benefit that you create all these test cases quickly, so I went from 1 test case to 16 test cases really quickly, and each one of these would now run through those pages with the various data combinations I selected. But each one is still dynamically linked to this template. So let's say I've decided to add a make to this list. So if I go back to my insurance data, see, we actually had a lot more options here, and I didn't use all of them. I hadn't added them all to my test sheet. So let's say business analysts come to you, the testers, and they say, you know what, we've added a bunch of these options in, and we're going to have to test them, and we have to test Honda now to make sure that that goes into our regression pack. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to add another instance or another value value combination to your test sheet. Basically, I'm just going to add another instance or another column to this combination. I'm going to call it Honda. And I'll just go ahead and select the Honda, testing the Honda with the rest of my straight through options. But basically now I have a test case where I need an extra Honda, an instance where I need an extra test case in my test sheet. I now have 17 instances here. All I have to do is go to my instance folder, my template instance folder that's based on my test sheet template. I don't have to do anything else. I select reinstantiate instance. So here you can see I have reinstantiate instance. Click on that. And down at the bottom, that last test case was added. And because everything was already linked, the test sheet was linked to the template, and each of the controls was already linked to an attribute in my test sheet, I now have the data variations stored with the appropriate attributes or test step values here for Tosca to know how to steer through the application for the Honda test. Okay. Let's look at another really quick example. So I have a demo web shop application which some of you, if you've done any of our trainings before, should be familiar with this web shop. It's nothing more than just a simple web shop where you can order, and it's a test one, so you can go in and you can play around with this if you want. You can register a user and mess around with it and do your own testing at home if you have a trial Tosca license. So it's demowebshop.tricentis.com, and I'm testing on the desktops page. We have an item called Build Your Own Cheap Computer, and you can select a different processor type, different RAM, different HDD, and add an optional software package. And then you can go ahead and go through and purchase that item. So I have a demo web shop section set up in my test case section already. I have a test case that's already in work. And I've set up one test case that goes through, it logs in, goes to this page with my desktop computers. It selects a specific type of computer. Oops. Change quantity to 1. It selects a specific type of computer, adds a number of them to the cart, and then goes out, checks out, pays for the item, verifies that I was able to purchase it properly, and then logs out. Okay, so that's what the test case is doing. It's going through, and so this page that we're looking at here is the page here, and I'm just steering Tosca through here. So what I want to do is quickly build a test sheet that's based on this computer page. So build a custom computer, or I think we have it called buy a custom computer. Oops. Oops. Okay, so build a custom computer, or sorry, buy a custom computer. Okay, so now let me go ahead and pull up the application so that you can see. I have the process. What am I going to use on this page, right? I'm going to be using these radio buttons, these radio buttons, these radio buttons, selecting one of these text box, check boxes here, maybe quantity, and then down below selecting add to cart. Okay. Those are the attributes where I'm going to have my data variations. Obviously, there are best practices for setting up test sheets. I'm not going to go into too much detail about that for time purposes and just to kind of keep it simple. So we're just going to here add the attributes that we are going to be using on this page so that you can see how you quickly set that up. Okay, so I have my processor attribute that I've added to my test sheet. Okay, this is a place where I'm going to have some data variations. What were the data variations of the processor? Well, I could choose slow, medium, or fast. So I just go ahead and add an instance slow, add another instance medium, and one more that I call fast. Okay? And again, without going into too much detail, I'm going to go ahead and specify that which one is going to be my happy path value or the straight through. So in this case, it's the slow processor. That's the one that we expect the most frequently. That's going to be in our smoke test, basically. Okay. Then I add in my RAM attribute. Okay. And the data combinations for RAM were 8 gigabytes, 4 gigabytes, and 2 gigabytes. So I'm going to use a shortcut here, and that shortcut basically you can use this shortcut anytime you want to quickly do the last thing you did in Tosca, and that's control and then the comma. Okay, and that quickly redoes the last, creates the last object you just created. So I did that. Now I'll do 2 gigabytes. Okay, so now I have my combinations for RAM. I will create an attribute for HDD. And so you have the shortcut here for adding, I won't say that. Then I have 320 gigabytes and 400 gigabytes. and I will go ahead and I will generate instances using, oh, sorry, I forgot to define my straight through or my happy path instance. And Tosca will create these depending on the combination method I want to use. So this is a conversation way beyond what we're going to have today, but you can go ahead and look them up or take the Test Design Specialist Level 1 course to find out more about the combination methods. I'll choose linear expansion, which chooses one test focus for each test scenario, for each instance combination. And you can see now that I have created 6 instances or 6 test cases that's going to test, that's going to optimally test all of my combinations going through that application. And now we know that what we want to do is link, oops, what we want to do is so now we know that what we want to do is convert that test case into a template and link those values. So I link my processor attribute. Oops. Why is that not working? Oops. I will turn my test case into a template. I will link my test sheet to the template. And go ahead and link those values. Okay. And so what I will instantiate. And now I have my 6 test cases with the proper data combinations for each one. Right? So I have slow at 8 gigs, 320, 8 gigs, 320, and so on. If I want these to have more meaningful names, I can change them somewhere here. So if I wanted this to say like 8, 320, whatever, I mean, you know, however you want it. If this is a more meaningful, or this is test case 2, or you have IDs for these test cases, you just have to go ahead and reinstantiate, and that will update. And one more final thing I want to show you is what happens if I don't want to run every step every time. So this is a huge thing with test templates, is that it's not just about data combinations, but let's say I'm going through the same flow and sometimes I want to skip steps, or I want to make sure that I only run a step or a set of steps or a folder in certain cases. So here I'm going to add an additional attribute, because remember in our application we had this, oops, software add-on. So I'm going to go ahead and add that attribute here. I'm going to call it software option. And I'm going to say add an instance. Yes is my straight through. I'm using the shortcut F7 there in case you're wondering. And no. And I'm going to go ahead and complete my instances. So what all that happens is I have, with complete instances, added the straight through value to all of my existing test cases, but created an extra test cases for no, let's say, additional software. Okay. Now, the way that I've set this up, the way that the data is set up here, doesn't match the way the test case is built, the way that the modules are built, right? Because here for the software add-on, I have checkboxes that need to be either true or false. And so let's say I'm always going to be adding image viewer, or let's say I'm always going to be adding the Office suite. And so when it says yes, it's going to be the office suite is true, but when it says no, there's no additional add-on. Okay, so that means the value is always going to be true if it says yes, and if it doesn't, then I actually don't want this step to be added, right? So there's an additional column that you can add to your template. So if it's not there, you will go to, column chooser by right-clicking up on the column headers here, and you select condition. And this is for all templates. Once a test case is a template, you can add conditions on a template, on a test step folder, or on test steps or on test step values. And what that means is you can add a condition which tells Tosca when to run or not run, or under what conditions to run or not run steps, test step values, test step folders, or the entire template. And then based on that condition, your template instances will be generated differently. So let's say all you do is you drag and drop your attribute or your instance or whatever it is that you want to set the condition based on. So in this case, I'm setting the condition based on the value for software option. And I'll show you a couple of variations of this. And it will automatically say, okay, run this test case on the condition that the software option attribute is not equal to null. Well, my values aren't null or not null. Mine's either yes or no. So I'll say run it when it's not, you could say run it when it's not equal to no, right? So anytime that this is not equal to no, it will run. I could also say when it is equal to yes, I want to run this step. So select that Office Suite is true when the software option over here says yes. And when it says no, then this step will not be run. It will not be selected. Another option here, I'll go ahead and clear this value, is to link an instance. So I could say, I could link the instance here. And you can see by default that chose when the software option attribute is equal to yes, then go ahead and run that step. If the software attribute is no, go ahead and, I could say modify this to say when it's not equal to no, go ahead and run that step. You can concatenate conditions. So in this case, it doesn't make sense, but I could say if it's not equal to no and then add another condition there, or just drag and drop something else. You see, and it automatically adds a second condition. So you could say or and, depending on whether you want both conditions to be met or not. And again, you can do this on any level here in the template. And then once you reinstantiate your instances, you'll see, so not only did I now add my last test case, but where it said no, there's no software package selected. So you can see this is empty. Whereas here, where it was yes was selected, it ran the test step. Okay, and if you put a condition on the folder level, you would go ahead and skip entire folders. So you might see a test case if there was a condition in the template on an entire folder. So build computer, for example, then you might skip an entire folder. It could be that you have a set of steps in here, specifically if you are testing an invalid value, and when you test the invalid value, you expect to not go through the entire checkout and payment process, right? Because it won't let you select it won't let you buy that invalid computer, hopefully. So you want to then have a set of steps to check that you are not able to purchase it. And then you would want to set a condition on the folder level where you would say only run this folder if the value is valid, if the attribute is, or instance is a valid instance, or if it's an invalid instance, or so on. And then it could skip certain folders or run certain folders, which contain steps. Okay? So you have here this maximum maintenance, or totally reduced maintenance here, because you basically are just maintaining everything in the template and the test sheet, and then reinstantiating or multiplying those changes throughout all of the test cases that are based on that template. I will quickly answer a few questions, and then we'll go ahead and end the session. How can I execute this? So that's a great question. So I'm not going to go too into detail about the execution section, but here I have an execution list where I can, this is where you're actually running. You're no longer testing your tests to make sure they work properly. You're executing and tracking and logging the results. You would not drag your template. So here's the template. You would not drag your template into the execution section. You would drag the instance folder, and the instance folder will then bring over all of those test cases. And why would I want to do that? Well, that's because so let's say we would go ahead and add just a test instance here. So this is really just to show you what happens if I reinstantiate, create another test case. Now I go to the execution section and synchronize, and there all of my new updates have been brought over to the execution section. I don't have to manually make sure that I'm adding or deleting test cases to make the execution list sync up with the template instance folder. So there's a direct linkage here when I've done it like this, which is obviously a huge benefit. Let's see, some other questions. Does it matter in which order you complete the test sheet and the templates? Also a great question. This obviously depends on your business flow. Typically, the recommendation would be you can have the modules being set up alongside the test sheets, because the modules are the scanning of the application, and once the application is ready, you can scan page by page. And the test sheets can be set up maybe in a workshop at the beginning with business to define the various testing scenarios for each requirement. And then once those two are set up, then you can go ahead and build the templates. So build the test case and turn it into a template and instantiate it. Obviously, best practices here. Someone asked about best practices. Let's go ahead and talk about number one. Best practice is you always make sure that you, when a template is created, link it to a test sheet. Okay, so link it to a test sheet. And this is because you don't want to have templates and test sheets floating around that aren't linked. How can you tell if a template's been linked to a test sheet? You can go to the template, and on the Properties tab, you will find, if it is linked, it will say it will have a schema name. It will say Test Sheet by Custom Computer. And you can jump to the schema definition, and it will take you to the test sheet. Which role path is this is creating templates most relevant for? Great question. So for those of you familiar with our role paths, you'll know that this is the most relevant for automation specialists. So this is the automation specialist role path. one more time the steps that you have to follow. Let me go ahead and write this down. So let's switch over to Tosca one more time, and let me get some white space open so that I can type some text. Okay. Oops. So you will, number one, convert test case to template. Number two, link test sheet to template. 3, link values to template. Number 4, add conditions if applicable, or maybe where applicable might be better, because I assume you will probably have some. And finally, instantiate template to create the template instances. And any changes to those test cases to the data must be made in the test sheets or to the template, not in the individual test cases, and you will always have to reinstantiate. Okay. So, thank you so much for joining. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. To get in touch with us at the Academy, you can contact support for technical questions. You can which is support@tricentis.com. You can contact training, which is academy@tricentis.com for any training related questions. You can go to our website where we have an Academy page, and you can check out our courses. Sign up for Automation Specialist Level 2, which is going to be the course that will directly follow and build upon everything I've shown you today. You can go ahead and check out our knowledge base, where we have our manual, where we have articles that you can find out from support. There's a community. There's an online manual for all of our tools. We have a Tricentis Academy YouTube channel where you can find we are posting every single week new content, so you can really keep up with that, and subscribe so that you find out when we're uploading new resources. And you can also find out previous recordings, like I mentioned before, on the user tutorials page on our website. And you will get a recording of this session following, or you will be able to access this session once we're done soon, I think maybe an hour or so after the session. I really appreciate you joining me, and I hope you learned a lot. I hope that you take advantage of these features in your role, and if you're not using templates yet, that you're able to start using them to really maximize efficiency in your testing portfolio in Tosca. So again, thank you so much for joining. I hope that you learned a lot, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.